Forbidden history. What if Eden was just a myth and not humanity's beginning? For thousands of years, humans have asked the same fundamental questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What makes us different from other creatures? The book of Genesis offers one answer, a story of divine creation, perfect beginnings, and tragic loss. But what if the story you've known since childhood about the origins of humanity, Adam and Eve in a perfect garden, humanity's fall from grace, our need for redemption, was never meant to be taken as literal history? Tonight, we're not going to dismiss the profound wisdom in these ancient texts. Instead, we're going to read them with fresh eyes and look at what Genesis actually says in the original Hebrew. Then examine the archaeological record, consider perspectives from ancient wisdom traditions, and explore what modern science has discovered about humanity's true origins. The journey we're about to take might challenge what you've always believed, but it may also reveal something far more magnificent about who we are and where we truly came from. So leave a like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from as we explore these discoveries together. Now settle in, let your mind wander, and prepare to see humanity's story through entirely new eyes in a spirit of wonder and curiosity. The Adam and Eve puzzle, reading Genesis with fresh eyes. Let's begin where many of us first encountered the story of human origins, in the opening chapters of Genesis. But we're going to read these familiar words as if we're encountering them for the first time, paying attention to details that might have been overlooked. Take a moment to consider the name Adam. In most English Bibles, it appears as a proper name, the first man, created by God's own hands. But here's something fascinating. In the original Hebrew, Adam isn't really a name at all. The word Adam simply means mankind or earthling. It comes from Adama, meaning ground or earth. So when Genesis speaks of Adam, it might be talking about humanity as a whole, not necessarily one individual man. This linguistic detail opens up entirely new ways of understanding the text. What if the story of Adam isn't about one person, but about the emergence of human consciousness itself? What if it's describing that pivotal moment when our ancestors first became truly aware of themselves, their mortality, their choices, and their relationship with the divine? The name Eve presents similar mysteries. In Hebrew, she's called Chava, which means living or mother of all living. But here's the puzzling part. Adam names her this after they've supposedly been expelled from Eden, after they've had children. Why would the mother of all humanity receive her name so late in the story? Unless perhaps this naming represents something symbolic, the recognition of life's continuation, humanity's ability to create and nurture future generations despite having gained the difficult knowledge of good and evil. And then there's the matter of the two creation accounts. Most readers assume Genesis tells one continuous story, but biblical scholars have long recognized that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 present notably different sequences of creation. In Genesis 1, plants and animals are created before humans. In Genesis 2, Adam is formed first, then plants are planted in Eden, then animals are brought to Adam to name, and finally Eve is created from Adam's rib. This isn't necessarily a contradiction. It might be two different perspectives on the same profound mystery. Genesis 1 might be presenting the cosmic view, the grand sweep of creation from God's perspective. Genesis 2 might be zooming in, focusing on the human experience of coming into consciousness within an already created world. The phrase image of God has sparked countless theological discussions, but what did it mean to the ancient Hebrew audience? The word tselem could refer to a physical representation, like a statue, but it also carried deeper meanings about representation, authority, and relationship. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, kings were often described as images of their gods, representatives of divine authority on earth. Could this mean that humans were created not as perfect beings who fell, but as representatives of divine consciousness, gradually awakening to their role as stewards and co-creators? The breath of life that God breathes into Adam is nephesh in Hebrew, often translated as soul, but literally meaning a breathing being, a living creature. Interestingly, animals are also described as having nephesh. The uniqueness of humans might not be in having souls, but in having consciousness that can recognize its divine source. When we examine the Eden narrative closely, we find not a simple story of perfection lost, but a complex meditation on the nature of human consciousness, choice, and responsibility. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil represents not forbidden knowledge, but the inevitable human awakening to moral complexity, to the reality that choices have consequences, that consciousness brings both tremendous power and tremendous responsibility. The Cain and Abel dilemma. Where did everyone else come from? If we read Genesis literally, we encounter some puzzling mathematical problems that have troubled careful readers for centuries. After Cain kills Abel, he expresses fear that anyone who finds me will kill me. But if the only people on earth were Adam, Eve, and Cain himself, who was he afraid of? God places a mark on Cain for protection, but protection from whom? The text says, Cain went to the land of Nod, east of Eden, and there he knew his wife, and she conceived. But where did this wife come from? Genesis 4:17 mentions her matter-of-factly, as if her existence needs no explanation. Even more intriguingly, Cain builds a city. Why would one man build a city for just his own family? Cities are built for populations, for communities, for people who need to live and work together. The very concept of a city implies trade, specialization, governance, and social complexity that requires substantial populations. The text seems to assume the existence of other people, other families, other communities that aren't explicitly mentioned in the Eden narrative. These details suggest that the Genesis authors were working with assumptions about human population that don't match a literal reading of the creation story. Perhaps they understood these stories as explaining something deeper than biological origins. Perhaps they were exploring the spiritual and psychological development of human consciousness, using representative figures to illustrate universal human experiences. Consider the story of Cain and Abel itself. It's often interpreted as the first murder, but it might also represent something more symbolic, the eternal human struggle between different approaches to life and survival. Abel represents the pastoral life, the harmony with natural cycles, the relationship with the divine through offering and sacrifice. Cain represents agriculture, the attempt to control and improve upon nature, the desire to create security through human effort and planning. The conflict between them might represent the tension that arose in human societies as they transitioned from hunter-gatherer to agricultural lifestyles. The curse placed upon Cain, that the ground will no longer yield its strength for him, that he will become a wanderer, reflects the real challenges that early agricultural societies faced as they learned to work with soil, weather, and the demands of settled life. Ancient Hebrew genealogies weren't necessarily meant to be comprehensive biological records. They often focused on significant figures, representative individuals who embodied important spiritual or cultural developments. The generations listed might represent eras, movements, or types of human development rather than literal family trees. The land of Nod, where Cain settles, is described as being east of Eden. In ancient Hebrew thought, movement eastward often represented movement away from divine presence, away from the source of life and blessing. But it also represented the beginning of human civilization, the development of technology, art, and culture that would characterize human society from that point forward. When Cain's descendants are described, we find the inventors of music, metalworking, and livestock management, the foundational technologies of human civilization. This suggests that the story isn't just about individual people, but about the emergence of human culture itself, the development of the skills and knowledge that would allow humanity to thrive in diverse environments across the globe. lost in translation, Hebrew words that changed everything. Translation is always interpretation, and some of the most crucial concepts in Genesis have been filtered through Greek, Latin, and English in ways that might obscure their original meanings. Understanding these Hebrew words in their original context can revolutionize how we understand the creation story. The word yom, usually translated as day, can mean many things in Hebrew. It can refer to a 24-hour period, but it can also mean an era, an age, or an indefinite period of time. When Genesis speaks of the day, when God created the heavens and earth, it might be describing vast cosmic ages rather than literal days. Even in English, we speak of the day of the dinosaurs or Napoleon's day. Without meaning a single 24-hour period, Hebrew usage was similarly flexible. This understanding opens up space for scientific timelines without necessarily contradicting the spiritual truths the text conveys. The days of creation might represent epochs in cosmic development, the formation of stars and planets, the emergence of life, the development of complex ecosystems, and finally the awakening of consciousness capable of recognizing its divine source. Bara and asa are both Hebrew words for creating, but they carry different nuances that most translations don't preserve. Bara suggests creating something entirely new, bringing something into existence that never existed before. It's used for the initial creation of the heavens and earth, for the creation of sea creatures and birds, and for the creation of humanity. Asa suggests forming, shaping, or organizing existing materials. Genesis uses both words, possibly indicating different types of creative activity, some involving completely new creation, others involving the organization and development of what already exists. The Hebrew word tselem, translated as image, might not mean physical appearance at all. It could refer to representation, function, or relationship. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, images of gods weren't just physical statues but were understood to be living representations of divine presence and authority. To be made in God's image might mean to be endowed with creative capacity, moral awareness, or spiritual consciousness rather than to physically resemble the divine. Consider the word Nachash, usually translated as serpent in the Eden story, but Nachash can also mean shining one or wise counselor. The root of the word relates to divination and wisdom. Some ancient traditions understood this figure not as a literal snake, but as a being of wisdom or enlightenment who offered humanity a choice between innocent ignorance and difficult knowledge. The serpent's promise, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil," wasn't necessarily a lie, but an accurate description of what human consciousness would become. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil uses the Hebrew words tov and ra. These don't necessarily mean moral good and evil as we understand them. Tov can mean good, beautiful, beneficial, or complete. Ra can mean bad, but also difficult, painful, or challenging. The tree might have offered knowledge of life's full spectrum, its joys and sorrows, its creative and destructive potentials, the complex reality of existence beyond simple innocence. Gan Eden literally means garden of delight or enclosed place of pleasure. The word Gan suggests a protected, cultivated space, while Eden relates to pleasure, delight, and luxury. It wasn't necessarily a geographic location, but perhaps a state of consciousness, a condition of harmony between humans and their environment, between the conscious and unconscious mind, between the human and divine aspects of existence. The Ruach Elohim that moves over the waters in Genesis 1 is often translated as Spirit of God, but Ruach simply means wind, breath, or spirit. It suggests movement, life force, the animating principle that brings form into existence. This could describe divine consciousness, pervading and activating the cosmos, rather than a supernatural being performing magical acts. The phrase, "Let us make man in our image," has puzzled interpreters for centuries. Who is the us? Some suggest it refers to the Trinity, but this concept wasn't developed until much later in Christian theology. Others propose it reflects the ancient Hebrew understanding of divine councils, where God deliberated with heavenly beings. But it might also represent the collaborative nature of consciousness emergence, not a single divine act, but a complex process involving multiple levels of reality. When God walks in the garden in the cool of the day, the Hebrew suggests this was a regular occurrence, not a unique event triggered by human disobedience. This implies an ongoing relationship between divine and human consciousness, a natural communion that was disrupted by the awakening to moral complexity, but not permanently severed. The consequences described after eating from the tree aren't just punishments, but accurate descriptions of human consciousness. Women experience increased pain in childbearing, perhaps reflecting the challenges of bringing new life into a world where choices have consequences. Men must work harder to cultivate the ground, reflecting humanity's complex relationship with nature, no longer living in simple harmony, but needing to understand, manage, and sometimes struggle with natural forces. The family tree problem, making sense of biblical genealogies. The genealogies in Genesis present fascinating puzzles when examined closely, challenging any literal interpretation of human origins, while possibly preserving important cultural and spiritual information in symbolic form. Take Methuselah, who supposedly lived 169 years. What could this mean? Some scholars suggest these numbers might represent lunar cycles rather than solar years, which would make the ages more realistic, but still quite long. Others propose that the numbers carried symbolic meaning, representing the completion of spiritual cycles, the fulfillment of divine purposes, or the accumulated wisdom of entire cultural traditions, rather than individual lifespans. The pattern of these numbers is intriguing. They seem to follow mathematical relationships that suggest symbolic rather than literal meaning. Many of the ages are multiples of significant numbers in ancient Near Eastern numerology. The total years from creation to the flood, as calculated from these genealogies, equals 1,656 years, a number that divides evenly by many symbolically important figures. The sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6 present another mystery that has captivated interpreters for millennia. They saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Their offspring were the Nephilim, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. Who were these sons of God? Early interpretations suggested angels, spiritual beings who somehow took physical form and intermingled with humans. This understanding appears in ancient Jewish texts like the Book of Enoch and was accepted by many early Christian writers. But other possibilities include the descendants of Seth, representing the godly lineage mixing with the descendants of Cain, or even members of an advanced human civilization whose superior knowledge and abilities seem divine to more primitive peoples. The flood narrative presents its own challenges to literal interpretation. How could Noah's family, just 8 people, have repopulated the earth with such genetic and cultural diversity? How could every animal species have been preserved on a single boat? How could plant life have survived a global flood? How could kangaroos have made it from Australia to the Middle East and back again? Many scholars now understand the flood story as preserving the memory of actual catastrophic flooding that affected early human civilizations. Archaeological evidence suggests massive flooding events in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago that would have seemed world-ending to the people who experienced them. Similar flood stories appear in cultures around the world, suggesting that catastrophic flooding was a common experience in human prehistory, possibly related to the end of the last ice age and the rapid melting of glacial ice. The story might preserve both historical memory and spiritual truth about divine judgment, human survival, and the possibility of new beginnings. Noah represents the preservation of human consciousness and civilization through catastrophic change, a theme that resonates with many spiritual traditions and may reflect actual historical experiences of cultural survival and renewal. The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 attempts to explain how all human diversity emerged from Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but genetic evidence shows human diversity developed over hundreds of thousands of years as populations spread across the globe and adapted to different environments. The biblical account might be preserving cultural memory of how different tribes and nations related to each other rather than literal biological history. The genealogies also show interesting patterns in how they compress time and highlight significant transitions. They seem more interested in showing spiritual and cultural development than in providing comprehensive family records. Generations might be skipped, representatives might be chosen to embody particular phases of human development, and symbolic relationships might be more important than biological ones. Internal contradictions when Scripture questions itself. Genesis contains details that seem to question a purely literal interpretation, as if the text itself is inviting readers to look deeper for meaning beyond surface narrative. When God asks Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" after they've eaten the forbidden fruit, why would an omniscient being need to ask? This question has troubled literalist interpreters, but it might not be about divine ignorance. Perhaps this question represents the beginning of human self-reflection, God giving them the opportunity to recognize and acknowledge their changed condition. The question might be pedagogical rather than informational, designed to help humans understand their new relationship with consciousness, choice, and responsibility. The forbidden fruit is never identified as an apple in the Hebrew text. It's simply the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This detail might seem minor, but it suggests the story is more concerned with symbolic meaning than botanical accuracy. The focus is on what the fruit represents, the awakening to moral complexity, rather than what specific plant was involved. Were animals dying before humans supposedly introduced sin and death into the world? The text doesn't explicitly address this, but it presents predatory animals like lions alongside herbivores like sheep, suggesting that the ecological relationships we see today might have existed from the beginning. Perhaps death in the Genesis context refers specifically to human mortality awareness rather than biological death in general. Humans became the first creatures capable of understanding their own mortality, of grieving loss, of fearing death, a kind of death consciousness that changed everything about how they experienced existence. The cherubim placed at the entrance to Eden are described as having flaming swords. These are clearly mythological beings rather than literal creatures, suggesting that the story operates on a symbolic level where spiritual truths are conveyed through archetypal imagery. The flaming sword might represent the barrier between innocence and experience, the impossibility of returning to a state of unconscious harmony once consciousness has awakened to complexity. Genesis presents 2 different orders of creation. In chapter 1, plants and animals are created before humans. In chapter 2, Adam is formed first, then plants are planted in the garden, then animals are brought to Adam to name, and finally, Eve is created. This isn't necessarily a contradiction, but might represent different perspectives on the same mystery: the cosmic view versus the human experiential view. The timing problems extend beyond creation order. How long were Adam and Eve in the garden? The text gives no clear indication. Did they fall immediately, or did they live in innocence for years, decades, centuries? The absence of clear timing suggests the story might be more concerned with psychological and spiritual development than chronological sequence. Jesus himself frequently taught through parables, fictional stories that conveyed spiritual truths. He never claimed these stories were historically accurate, but he used them to illustrate profound principles about divine human relationships, moral choice, and spiritual development. The parables of the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, and the wise and foolish virgins weren't historical accounts, but powerful teaching tools that conveyed truth through narrative. Paul explicitly refers to part of the Genesis story as allegory in Galatians 4:24, where he writes about Sarah and Hagar. These things are being taken figuratively. The women represent two covenants. If Paul could interpret Genesis allegorically, perhaps modern readers have permission to do the same. Early Christian theologians like Origen understood that Scripture operated on multiple levels: literal, moral, and spiritual. The spiritual meaning wasn't less true than the literal, it was often more true, conveying eternal principles that transcended historical details. Augustine wrote that the creation account might not describe the temporal sequence of events, but the logical order of divine causation. The internal structure of Genesis itself suggests symbolic rather than purely historical intent. The book is carefully organized around the Hebrew word toledot, meaning generations or descendants. But these aren't just family trees, they're accounts of how different aspects of reality developed and differentiated over time. The generations of the heavens and earth, the generations of Adam, the generations of Noah. These might represent phases of cosmic and human development rather than literal genealogical records. Even the number 7, which appears throughout Genesis, suggests symbolic organization rather than historical reporting. 7 days of creation, 7 generations from Adam to Enoch, 7 pairs of clean animals on the ark. The repetition of this number points to symbolic completeness and perfection rather than coincidental historical accuracy. The sophisticated literary techniques evident throughout Genesis, wordplay, parallel structures, thematic development, symbolic imagery, suggest authors who were skilled storytellers and theologians rather than historians attempting to record factual events. The power of these stories lies not in their historical accuracy, but in their ability to convey profound truths about human nature, divine relationships, and the meaning of existence. Scientific origins: what the evidence actually reveals. Now let's turn our attention to what modern science has discovered about humanity's actual origins. Far from diminishing the mystery of human existence, these discoveries reveal a story that's perhaps even more remarkable than any ancient myth. A story of gradual awakening, epic journeys, and transformation that spans hundreds of thousands of years. Out of Africa, tracing our true ancestral journey. The evidence is now overwhelming. Humanity's story begins in Africa, not in a garden somewhere in Mesopotamia, but in the vast landscapes of East Africa, where our earliest ancestors first developed the characteristics that would make them recognizably human. The journey begins with Lucy, the 3.2 million year old Australopithecus afarensis, whose fossilized remains were discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Lucy walked upright, but her brain was still small, about the size of a chimpanzee's. She represents one step in the long process of human development, showing us that our evolution wasn't a sudden creation, but a gradual transformation spanning millions of years. From Lucy's time forward, we can trace the slow development of larger brains, more sophisticated tool use, and increasingly complex social behaviours. Homo habilis, the handyman, appeared around 2.8 million years ago, making the first stone tools. These simple implements, just rocks chipped to create sharp edges, represented a cognitive revolution, the first clear evidence of our ancestors' ability to plan ahead, to modify their environment, and to pass knowledge to future generations. Homo erectus emerged around 2 million years ago and became the first human ancestor to leave Africa, spreading across Asia and establishing populations from Georgia to Java. They developed more sophisticated tools, controlled fire, and may have been the first humans to cook food, a development that would have profound effects on brain development and social organization. But our story, the story of modern humans, Homo sapiens, begins much more recently, between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, again in Africa. Recent discoveries in Morocco suggest that modern human anatomy evolved earlier and across a broader geographic area than previously thought. But the African origin remains clear. These early humans possessed brains essentially identical to ours, with the same capacity for language, art, complex reasoning, and spiritual experience that characterizes humanity today. The Great Migration out of Africa wasn't a single exodus, but a series of waves spanning tens of thousands of years. There may have been earlier attempts that failed, populations that ventured into the Middle East but didn't establish permanent settlements. The first successful migration occurred around 70,000 years ago, following coastal routes around the Arabian Peninsula and into South Asia. These early migrants displayed remarkable adaptability. Some groups continued along the coastlines, developing sophisticated boat-building skills that allowed them to reach Australia by 50,000 years ago, a journey that required crossing at least 60 miles of open ocean even during ice ages when sea levels were much lower. Others moved north into Central Asia and eventually into Europe, where they encountered and interbred with Neanderthals who had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. Each of these movements left genetic fingerprints that we can still read today. DNA mutations accumulate at predictable rates, like a molecular clock that allows scientists to trace the paths our ancestors took across continents. African populations show the greatest genetic diversity, exactly what we'd expect if Africa was humanity's birthplace and other populations descended from smaller founder groups. The archaeological record supports this genetic evidence beautifully. The oldest examples of symbolic behaviour, cave paintings, jewellery, carved figurines, complex burial practices, appear first in Africa and then spread to other continents as humans migrated. We can literally follow the development of human culture through time and space, watching as our ancestors learned to create art, bury their dead with ceremony, and develop increasingly sophisticated technologies. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, created 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, show that our ancestors possessed fully modern artistic sensibilities. These aren't primitive scratches, but sophisticated artworks that demonstrate advanced understanding of perspective, movement, and symbolic representation. The artists who created them had minds identical to ours, capable of abstract thought, aesthetic appreciation, and spiritual expression. But here's what makes this scientific story spiritually profound. It reveals that all humans, regardless of race or ethnicity, are literally family. Every person alive today descends from those early African populations. The differences we see between ethnic groups represent tiny variations accumulated over thousands of years of geographic separation, surface differences overlaying fundamental unity. Climate played a crucial role in human dispersal. Ice ages created land bridges and opened new migration routes while closing others. During glacial periods, sea levels dropped by 300 feet or more, exposing vast areas of land that are now underwater. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia and North America, allowing the first Americans to walk from Siberia to Alaska. The Sahara Desert alternated between periods of lush grassland and arid barrier, controlling the flow of populations between Africa and the rest of the world. Humans succeeded not just because of their intelligence, but because of their incredible adaptability. Unlike other species that are specialized for particular environments, humans developed the ability to survive and thrive in environments from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra to high-altitude mountains. This adaptability came from culture, the ability to pass knowledge, skills, and innovations from one generation to the next and from one group to another. The interbreeding with other human species adds another layer of complexity to our story. For decades, scientists debated whether modern humans completely replaced archaic humans like Neanderthals, or whether there was interbreeding. The genetic evidence now clearly shows extensive hybridization. Most people of European and Asian descent carry 2–4% Neanderthal DNA, while people from Papua New Guinea and Australia carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. This discovery revolutionizes our understanding of human evolution. We're not the pure descendants of a single human lineage, but the results of multiple streams of human development converging and combining over hundreds of thousands of years. The tree of human evolution is more like a braided river, with different channels splitting apart and coming back together repeatedly over time. The agricultural revolution, humanity's actual fall from grace. Around 10,000 years ago, something revolutionary happened that truly did change everything about human existence. This wasn't the eating of forbidden fruit in a mythical garden, but the development of agriculture. And ironically, this real transformation bears striking similarities to the themes of the Eden story. For most of human history, over 95% of our species' existence, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests these societies were remarkably egalitarian and in many ways enviable. Without stored wealth to create class distinctions, most hunter-gatherer groups lived in small bands where resources were shared and social hierarchies were minimal. They worked fewer hours than modern people, had more leisure time, and enjoyed better nutrition than early agricultural societies. Hunter-gatherer societies typically worked about 20-30 hours per week to meet their basic needs, leaving plenty of time for social interaction, artistic expression, and spiritual practices. Their diets were diverse and nutritious, including a wide variety of plants, fruits, nuts, and animal proteins. They lived in close harmony with their environment, understanding seasonal cycles and ecological relationships in ways that allowed them to sustainably harvest from nature without depleting resources. But around 10,000 years ago, in multiple locations around the world, humans began deliberately planting and harvesting crops. This wasn't a sudden invention, but a gradual process, probably beginning with people managing wild plants more carefully, perhaps protecting useful plants from grazing animals, or deliberately scattering seeds in favourable locations, and eventually leading to full domestication of species like wheat, barley, rice, and corn. The agricultural revolution transformed human society in ways that parallel the biblical fall from grace with startling accuracy. Like Adam and Eve gaining knowledge that changed their relationship with their environment, early farmers gained the ability to produce surplus food. But this knowledge came with unprecedented challenges and responsibilities. Agricultural societies needed to stay in one place to tend their crops, leading to permanent settlements and eventually cities. This sedentary lifestyle brought new challenges. Houses needed to be built and maintained, stored grain attracted pests and required protection from raiders, and population growth led to competition for land and resources. The flexible, mobile lifestyle of hunter-gatherers gave way to the constraints and complications of settled life. Surplus food allowed population growth, but also created the need for storage, defense, and social organization on scales never before required. Some people could specialize in activities other than food production, leading to the development of crafts, trade, and eventually complex technologies. But this specialization also created interdependence and vulnerability. Hunter-gatherers could survive individually or in small groups, but agricultural societies required cooperation and coordination among hundreds or thousands of people. The development of social hierarchies was perhaps the most profound change agriculture brought. Agricultural societies needed organization and leadership on scales that small hunter-gatherer bands never required. Kings, priests, and noble classes emerged to coordinate large-scale projects like irrigation systems, city walls, and temple construction. But with these hierarchies came inequality, exploitation, and systematic oppression that would characterize most human civilizations for the next 10,000 years. Archaeological evidence shows that early agricultural societies were less healthy than their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Skeletons from early farming communities show signs of malnutrition, disease, and physical stress that aren't found in hunter-gatherer remains. People got shorter, their teeth got worse, and their lifespans decreased. The diverse, nutritious diet of hunter-gatherers gave way to dependence on a few staple crops that provided calories but lacked essential nutrients. New diseases emerged as humans began living in close proximity to domesticated animals. Influenza came from pigs, smallpox from cattle, plague from rodents attracted to stored grain. Dense human populations created ideal conditions for epidemic diseases that could devastate entire communities. The Black Death, which killed 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century, was made possible by agricultural civilization. Environmental destruction began with agriculture. Forests were cleared for farmland, leading to soil erosion and climate change on regional scales. The Mediterranean region, once heavily forested, became the scrubland we know today, partly due to agricultural clearing and overgrazing. The Fertile Crescent, where agriculture first developed, eventually became so degraded that it could no longer support the civilizations that had flourished there. Violence escalated dramatically with the agricultural revolution. Hunter-gatherer societies certainly experienced conflict, but archaeological evidence shows a massive increase in warfare after the development of agriculture. Cities needed walls, warriors became specialized professions, and entire populations could be enslaved or slaughtered in ways that weren't possible when humans lived in small mobile bands. The invention of bronze and iron weapons made violence more deadly and systematic. The agricultural revolution also transformed gender relations in ways that echo the Eden story's description of changed relationships between men and women. In most hunter-gatherer societies, women's economic contribution through gathering was as important as men's hunting, and gender relations were relatively egalitarian. But agriculture often led to increased male dominance, as ploughing and herding typically became male occupations, while women's roles became more focused on child-rearing and domestic tasks. The development of private property concepts fundamentally changed human relationships with the natural world. Hunter-gatherers generally understood land and resources as communal, available to all members of the group. Agriculture created the need to control specific plots of land, leading to concepts of ownership, inheritance, and territorial defense that continue to shape human societies today. Yet, like the biblical fall, the agricultural revolution was irreversible and ultimately necessary for human development. The population growth and technological development it enabled eventually led to writing, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and all the cultural achievements of human civilization. The knowledge gained was both blessing and curse, both liberation and bondage. The parallels to Eden are striking and numerous. Humans gained knowledge, the knowledge of how to control their food supply, but lost innocence and simplicity. They gained power over their environment, but also became enslaved by the demands of their crops and civilizations. They multiplied greatly, as promised to Adam and Eve, but also began experiencing suffering on scales never before possible. Perhaps most tellingly, agriculture made humans acutely aware of their dependence on forces beyond their control. Droughts, floods, pests, and diseases could destroy crops and bring famine. The cycle of planting and harvest created anxiety about the future that hunter-gatherers rarely experienced. This uncertainty may have contributed to the development of more complex religious systems, as agricultural peoples sought to understand and influence the forces that controlled their survival. DNA and our shared heritage. The genetic revolution. The development of genetic analysis has revolutionized our understanding of human origins in ways that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. By reading the chemical letters written in our DNA, scientists can now trace human ancestry with unprecedented precision, revealing a story of unity, diversity, and connection that spans the globe and reaches back hundreds of thousands of years. At the heart of this genetic story are two remarkable individuals known as mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam. These aren't the biblical Adam and Eve, but they are our common ancestors in a very real sense. Mitochondrial Eve lived in Africa between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago, and every person alive today descends from her through their maternal line. Her mitochondrial DNA, genetic material inherited only from mothers, can be found in every human being on Earth. Y-chromosomal Adam lived somewhat more recently, around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, and every man alive today inherited his Y chromosome from this single African ancestor. The fact that these two individuals didn't live at exactly the same time reflects the complex dynamics of population genetics, where different genetic lineages can have different histories depending on inheritance patterns and population changes over thousands of generations. It's crucial to understand that these weren't the only humans alive at their respective times. There were many other people living then, but through the random processes of genetic inheritance and population changes over thousands of generations, the mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes of other individuals were eventually lost. Only the genetic lines of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam survive to the present day. The genetic evidence for the out-of-Africa migration is overwhelming and elegant in its consistency. African populations show far greater genetic diversity than populations anywhere else in the world. Exactly what we'd expect if Africa was humanity's birthplace, and other populations descended from small founder groups that carried only a subset of the original African genetic variation. This pattern is repeated at every level of analysis. The further geographically a population is from Africa, the less genetic diversity it shows, reflecting the serial founder effects that occurred as small groups split off from larger populations during migration. Native American populations, the most geographically distant from Africa, show the least genetic diversity of any major human population, consistent with their ancestors being among the last to leave the African-Eurasian landmass. One of the most remarkable discoveries has been evidence of population bottlenecks in human history, times when our species came dangerously close to extinction. Around 70,000 years ago, the human population may have dropped to as few as 10,000 individuals, possibly due to climate changes caused by the massive Toba volcanic eruption in Indonesia. This super eruption ejected so much ash into the atmosphere that it may have triggered a volcanic winter lasting several years. This bottleneck may have been what triggered the major out-of-Africa migration, as environmental pressures forced our ancestors to search for new habitats. The recovery from this near extinction demonstrates human resilience and adaptability. From that small population 70,000 years ago, humans eventually spread to every continent except Antarctica, adapting to environments from the Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests to high-altitude mountains. The genetic signatures of these ancient migrations are still visible in modern populations. Each wave of migration left distinctive markers that allow scientists to trace the paths our ancestors took across continents. The first coastal migrations can be tracked through populations in India, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Later inland migrations through Central Asia left different genetic signatures in European and Northern Asian populations. But perhaps the most startling genetic discovery has been the evidence of interbreeding between modern humans and other human species. For decades, scientists debated whether modern humans completely replaced archaic humans like Neanderthals, or whether there was interbreeding. The development of ancient DNA technology finally provided a definitive answer. There was extensive hybridization. Most people of European and Asian descent carry 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, while people from Papua New Guinea and Australia carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Genetic material from a previously unknown human species identified entirely through DNA analysis. Some populations carry genetic material from additional archaic human lineages that haven't yet been identified through fossil remains. This discovery revolutionizes our understanding of human evolution. We're not the pure descendants of a single human lineage, but the result of multiple streams of human development converging and combining over hundreds of thousands of years. The tree of human evolution is more like a braided river, with different channels splitting apart and coming back together repeatedly over time. Ancient DNA technology has allowed scientists to extract genetic material from fossils tens of thousands of years old, revealing details about prehistoric populations that would have been impossible to discover just a few decades ago. We can now track the movements of specific groups, understand their relationships to modern populations, and even reconstruct aspects of their appearance and lifestyle. The Neanderthal genome, completed in 2010, revealed that these archaic humans were far more sophisticated than previously thought. They had large brains, made complex tools, used fire, created art, and may have had language. Their genetic material persists in modern humans, particularly in genes related to immune function and adaptation to cold climates. The Neanderthal contribution to modern human genetics may have been crucial for our ancestors' survival in the challenging environments of Ice Age Europe and Asia. The study of the human microbiome, the trillions of bacteria that live in and on our bodies, adds another dimension to our origin story. These bacterial partners have co-evolved with humans for millions of years, and different human populations carry distinctive microbial signatures that reflect their ancestry and migration patterns. We're not just individuals, but walking ecosystems, shaped by countless other organisms that have accompanied us throughout our evolutionary journey. Epigenetics, the study of how environmental factors affect gene expression, reveals that our ancestors' experiences can literally be passed down to their descendants. Trauma, stress, nutrition, and other environmental factors can cause chemical changes to DNA that affect how genes are expressed in future generations. This means that the challenges our ancestors faced, famines, wars, migrations, adaptations to new environments, didn't just shape their own lives, but continue to influence us today. The future of genetic archaeology promises even more remarkable discoveries. As technology improves, scientists will be able to extract DNA from increasingly ancient remains, potentially pushing our understanding of human origins back hundreds of thousands of years. We may eventually be able to reconstruct the genomes of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam themselves, giving us unprecedented insight into our common ancestors. What does this genetic evidence mean for our understanding of human nature and origins? It reveals that we are simultaneously unique individuals and integral parts of a vast human family that spans continents and millennia. Every person carries within their DNA the story of humanity's greatest adventure, the journey from our origins in Africa to every corner of the globe. The genetic unity revealed by modern science provides a biological foundation for the spiritual teaching that all humans are connected, that we are indeed one family despite our surface differences. The diversity we see in human populations represents the creative adaptation of our species to different environments and challenges, but it overlays a fundamental genetic unity that connects every person alive today to our common African ancestors. Ancient wisdom traditions. What the mystics always knew. While modern science provides one lens for understanding human origins, ancient wisdom traditions offer another perspective that has guided human understanding for millennia. These traditions, developed through centuries of spiritual practice and mystical insight, often describe reality in ways that complement rather than contradict scientific discoveries. Tonight, we'll explore how ancient mystics understood human origins and consciousness development, Gnostic and early Christian mysteries, the hidden Gospels. In 1945, a remarkable discovery near the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi changed our understanding of early Christianity forever. Buried in clay jars for over 1,500 years were 52 texts representing a very different version of Christian teaching than what became Orthodox doctrine. These Gnostic Gospels and treatises present an alternative view of human origins that challenges conventional interpretations of Genesis and offers profound insights into the nature of consciousness and spiritual development. The Gospel of Thomas, perhaps the most famous of these texts, presents Jesus speaking about humanity's divine origins in ways that echo both ancient mysticism and modern consciousness research. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father, Jesus says in this text. This teaching suggests that human origins are not about a fall from grace, but about a forgetting of our true divine nature that can be remembered through spiritual practice and self-knowledge. The Gnostic creation myth, found in texts like the Apocryphon of John, presents a radically different story of human origins. In this account, the material world was created not by the true God, but by a lesser divine being called the Demiurge, who mistakenly believed himself to be the supreme deity. The true God, along with divine wisdom, Sophia, exists in a realm of pure consciousness called the pleroma, or fullness. According to Gnostic teaching, humans contain sparks of this divine consciousness trapped within material bodies created by the Demiurge. The goal of human existence is not to obey the commands of the Creator God of Genesis, but to awaken to our true divine nature and return to the pleroma. This perspective presents the serpent in Eden not as a tempter, but as a liberator who offered humanity the knowledge needed to escape the Demiurge's deception. The Valentinian school of Gnosticism, founded by the teacher Valentinus in the 2nd century CE, developed sophisticated teachings about multiple levels of reality and human consciousness. They described 3 types of humans: pneumatic, spiritual, psychic, soul-based, and helic, material. Only pneumatic humans carried the divine spark needed for spiritual awakening, while psychic humans could potentially develop spiritually through proper teaching and practice. These teachings bear striking resemblances to modern understanding of consciousness development and evolution. The idea that consciousness exists on multiple levels, that humans have different capacities for spiritual awareness, and that the goal of existence is the development of higher consciousness, parallels many contemporary spiritual and psychological theories. The Gnostic text, The Reality of the Rulers, presents an even more radical interpretation of Genesis, suggesting that the entire creation story represents spiritual allegory rather than historical fact. The rulers, archons, are spiritual forces that keep humanity trapped in illusion, while the true divine reality exists beyond the material world entirely. This perspective invites readers to see the Genesis story as describing psychological and spiritual processes rather than historical events. Marcion, an influential 2nd century Christian teacher, went so far as to completely reject the Old Testament, arguing that the God described in Genesis was not the true divine Father revealed by Jesus. Marcion saw the Old Testament God as a lesser deity concerned with law, judgment, and material creation, while Jesus revealed a higher God of pure love and spiritual truth. Though Marcion's teachings were eventually declared heretical, they represented a significant strand of early Christian thought that questioned literal interpretations of Hebrew scripture. The Gnostic emphasis on direct spiritual experience over religious authority resonated with many early Christians who sought personal relationship with the divine rather than mediation through institutional hierarchies. These traditions emphasized that each individual could achieve direct knowledge, gnosis, of divine reality through spiritual practice, meditation, and inner development. The suppression of Gnostic Christianity by Orthodox authorities involved both theological and political considerations. The Gnostic emphasis on individual spiritual authority threatened the developing ecclesiastical hierarchy, while their sophisticated philosophical teachings appealed primarily to educated elites rather than the broader population that early Christianity sought to convert. Modern scholarship has revealed that early Christianity was far more diverse than previously understood. Rather than a single unified movement, early Christianity encompassed multiple schools of thought with different understandings of Jesus' teachings, human nature, and spiritual development. The version that became Orthodox Christianity was not necessarily more authentic than alternatives, but proved more successful at organizing institutional structures and appealing to broad populations. The rediscovery of Gnostic texts has provided new perspectives on familiar biblical stories and teachings. The Gospel of Philip presents Mary Magdalene as Jesus' closest companion and spiritual equal, challenging traditional interpretations of women's roles in early Christianity. The Gospel of Mary describes Mary Magdalene receiving special teachings from Jesus about the nature of spiritual vision and inner development. These alternative Christian traditions offer profound insights into human consciousness and spiritual development that complement rather than contradict modern scientific understanding. The Gnostic emphasis on consciousness as fundamental reality, on the importance of self-knowledge for spiritual development, and on the possibility of transcending ordinary awareness through spiritual practice resonates with contemporary research in psychology, neuroscience, and consciousness studies. The Gnostic understanding that humans contain divine consciousness trapped within material forms parallels modern insights about the relationship between consciousness and brain function. While neuroscience maps the neural correlates of consciousness, it still cannot explain how subjective experience emerges from objective matter, a mystery that Gnostic traditions address through their sophisticated metaphysical frameworks. Eastern perspectives, cycles of creation and consciousness. Eastern wisdom traditions offer perspectives on human origins that differ dramatically from Western linear thinking about creation and time. These traditions, developed over thousands of years through contemplative practice and philosophical inquiry, present cyclical views of existence where consciousness and cosmos undergo endless processes of manifestation and dissolution. Hindu cosmology presents a vision of reality that spans unimaginable periods of time through cycles called yugas. According to these teachings, the universe undergoes 4 great ages: Satya Yuga, the golden age of truth; Treta Yuga, the silver age; Dvapara Yuga, the bronze age; and Kali Yuga, the current iron age of darkness and confusion. Each cycle lasts hundreds of thousands of years, and the entire cycle repeats endlessly through cosmic time. In the Satya Yuga, humans supposedly lived in perfect harmony with divine consciousness, possessing extraordinary spiritual abilities and direct perception of truth. As the cycles progressed, human consciousness gradually became more dense and limited, losing connection with higher spiritual realities. This decline parallels the biblical narrative of the fall from Eden, but in Hindu cosmology, it represents a natural cosmic process rather than punishment for disobedience. The Vedic creation myths present consciousness, Purusha, as the fundamental reality from which all manifestation emerges. In one account, the cosmic being Purusha sacrifices himself to become the universe, with different parts of his body becoming various aspects of creation. This teaching suggests that all existence, including human consciousness, represents aspects of one divine reality experiencing itself through multiplicity. Buddhist teachings present yet another perspective on origins that emphasizes the beginningless nature of consciousness and existence. Rather than seeking a first cause or creator, Buddhism focuses on understanding the processes through which consciousness creates experience through karma and rebirth. According to Buddhist cosmology, beings have been cycling through existence for beginningless time, with consciousness migrating between different realms of existence based on the quality of awareness and action. The Buddhist teaching of dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, describes how all phenomena arise in dependence upon causes and conditions, with nothing existing independently or permanently. This perspective sees human consciousness as part of an endless web of interconnection, where individual identity represents temporary formations within the flowing stream of awareness. Tibetan Buddhist traditions preserve sophisticated teachings about consciousness that bridge life and death through the bardo states, intermediate conditions between incarnations where consciousness experiences various stages of dissolution and reformation. The Tibetan Book of the Dead provides detailed maps of these consciousness states, suggesting that individual awareness persists through death and rebirth while potentially evolving toward greater wisdom and compassion. Jain cosmology presents an even more radical vision of beginningless existence, teaching that consciousness, jiva, is fundamental to reality and has always existed. According to Jain teachings, individual souls have been cycling through countless lifetimes across different species and realms of existence, gradually evolving toward perfect knowledge and liberation. This tradition sees human birth as a rare opportunity for spiritual development, with consciousness potentially achieving complete awakening through proper understanding and ethical conduct. Chinese Taoist traditions offer perspectives on origins that emphasize natural spontaneity and effortless action, Wu Wei. The Tao Te Ching describes the Tao as the source from which all existence emerges, but characterizes this source as empty, mysterious, and beyond conceptual understanding. Rather than creation through divine command, Taoist cosmology presents manifestation as natural flowering of inherent potential within the Tao itself. The Taoist concept of yin and yang suggests that all existence emerges through the dynamic interplay of complementary forces, with consciousness arising through the balance and interaction of these fundamental principles. This perspective sees human awareness as naturally arising when conditions are appropriate, without requiring supernatural intervention or divine creation. Ancient Chinese creation myths, like the story of Pangu emerging from the cosmic egg, present creation as gradual differentiation within primordial unity. Pangu grows for thousands of years, separating heaven and earth through his expanding consciousness, until his death allows his body to become the landscape and his breath to become the wind. These stories suggest that human consciousness participates in ongoing cosmic creativity, rather than being separate from natural processes. Kundalini yoga traditions describe human consciousness as containing dormant spiritual energy that can be awakened through proper practice. This energy, symbolized as a serpent coiled at the base of the spine, represents the evolutionary potential within human awareness. As Kundalini awakens and rises through the chakra system, consciousness expands through progressively higher levels of spiritual development. These Eastern traditions generally share several key insights about human consciousness and origins. First, they tend to see consciousness as fundamental rather than emergent. Awareness is not produced by matter, but matter manifests within consciousness. Second, they emphasize cyclical rather than linear time, with consciousness undergoing endless processes of development, dissolution, and renewal. Third, they focus on practical methods for directly experiencing higher states of awareness, rather than relying solely on belief or doctrine. The Eastern emphasis on meditation and contemplative practice has provided detailed maps of consciousness states that complement modern neuroscientific research. Advanced practitioners report experiences of expanded awareness, dissolution of ordinary self-boundaries, and direct perception of the interconnected nature of reality, experiences that modern brain imaging is beginning to document and understand. The concept of rebirth or reincarnation, central to many Eastern traditions, offers a different perspective on individual identity and cosmic purpose than Western linear thinking about single lifetimes. While controversial from scientific perspectives, reincarnation teachings encourage taking responsibility for long-term spiritual development and recognizing connections with all forms of life. Modern physics has found surprising parallels with Eastern mystical descriptions of reality, particularly in quantum mechanics and cosmology. The fundamental role of consciousness in quantum measurement, the holographic principle in cosmology, and the discovery of quantum entanglement all resonate with ancient Eastern teachings about the nature of awareness and cosmic interconnection. Indigenous wisdom, First Peoples' origin, teachings. Indigenous cultures around the world have preserved origin teachings that often present profound insights into human consciousness and our relationship with the natural world. These oral traditions, maintained through countless generations, offer perspectives on human origins that are both deeply rooted in specific landscapes and universally applicable to understanding our place in the cosmos. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories present perhaps the most sophisticated Indigenous understanding of consciousness and creation. According to these teachings, the Dreamtime represents a dimension of reality where ancestral spirits continue to exist and where the creative forces that shape the landscape remain active. Human consciousness can access Dreamtime through ceremony, meditation, and proper relationship with country, the living landscape. In Aboriginal understanding, the physical world and Dreamtime interpenetrate continuously, with every feature of the landscape containing spiritual significance and story. Human beings are not separate from this sacred geography, but are integral parts of the dreaming patterns that created and sustain reality. This perspective sees human consciousness as naturally connected to cosmic creativity rather than being isolated individual minds. The Aboriginal concept of country encompasses not just physical territory, but the entire web of relationships between land, spirits, ancestors, plants, animals, and human consciousness. To be disconnected from country is to lose essential aspects of identity and spiritual well-being. This teaching suggests that human consciousness evolved in intimate relationship with specific environments and cannot be fully understood apart from ecological context. Native American emergent stories, found in traditions like the Hopi, Navajo, and Pueblo peoples, describe humanity emerging from previous worlds through cycles of creation and destruction. These stories often involve emergence through different levels of reality, with consciousness gradually awakening to greater awareness and responsibility through each successive world. The Hopi emergence story describes 4 worlds, with humanity currently living in the 4th world. In each previous world, humans were given opportunities to live in harmony with natural and spiritual laws, but eventually, corruption and imbalance led to the destruction of each world and the need to emerge into a new level of existence. These teachings parallel both Hindu Yuga cycles and modern environmental concerns about sustainability and spiritual development. Many Native American traditions describe the first humans as being created from clay, corn, or other natural materials, but emphasize that this creation involves spiritual as well as physical dimensions. The Cherokee origin story tells of humans being made from clay, but initially being too soft, then too hard, until finally the Creator achieved the proper balance. This suggests that human consciousness represents a delicate balance between material and spiritual aspects of existence. African cosmologies, preserved in traditions like the Dogon of Mali and Yoruba of West Africa, often present sophisticated understandings of consciousness and cosmic cycles. The Dogon creation myth describes the universe emerging from vibrations within a cosmic egg, with human consciousness representing one aspect of this fundamental creative process. Their astronomical knowledge, including detailed understanding of the Sirius star system, suggests sophisticated observation and contemplation of cosmic relationships. Yoruba traditions present a complex understanding of human consciousness, involving multiple souls or aspects: Ori, personal destiny; Yima, life force; and Elida, creative essence. These teachings suggest that human awareness operates on multiple levels simultaneously, with individual identity representing the intersection of various spiritual forces and ancestral influences. Shamanic traditions from cultures worldwide share common understandings about consciousness and spiritual reality that transcend cultural boundaries. Shamans report traveling through non-ordinary states of consciousness to other dimensions of reality, communicating with plant and animal spirits, and accessing information about healing and spiritual development. Plant teacher traditions, found throughout the Americas, Africa, and other regions, describe certain plants as conscious beings capable of transmitting knowledge about reality and human origins. Ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazon, peyote rituals among Native American tribes, and similar practices worldwide report consistent experiences of expanded consciousness, direct spiritual communication, and insights into the nature of existence. These plant-induced altered states often include visions of human origins that differ dramatically from both biblical and scientific accounts. Participants report experiencing themselves as part of vast webs of cosmic consciousness, seeing the interconnection between all forms of life, and receiving direct transmission of knowledge about spiritual development and healing. Indigenous understandings of time often differ fundamentally from Western linear concepts. Many traditions describe circular or spiral time, where past, present, and future interpenetrate and influence each other. Ancestors remain actively present in current reality, while future generations are considered when making decisions today. This perspective sees human consciousness as part of an eternal web of relationship rather than isolated individual minds existing in sequential time. The concept of reciprocity is central to most indigenous traditions, teaching that human consciousness exists in relationship with all aspects of creation. Rather than being separate from or superior to nature, humans are understood as having specific responsibilities to maintain balance and harmony within the web of life. This perspective suggests that human consciousness evolved as part of ecological systems and cannot be healthy when disconnected from natural relationships. Sacred geography is another common element in indigenous origin teachings. Specific landscapes are understood as living beings with their own consciousness and spiritual power. Human consciousness is seen as naturally attuned to these landscape spirits, with identity and spiritual well-being dependent on proper relationship with place. Many indigenous traditions describe humanity as being the youngest of creation's beings, given special responsibilities as caretakers and mediators between different forms of consciousness. Rather than being the crown of creation, humans are understood as students learning from elder beings, like plants, animals, minerals, and elemental forces. The emphasis on oral tradition in indigenous cultures reflects sophisticated understanding of how consciousness and memory function. Stories are not just entertainment, but technologies for transmitting essential knowledge about reality across generations. The rhythmic, repetitive nature of oral storytelling appears designed to access altered states of consciousness, where deeper learning can occur. Modern scientific research has begun validating many indigenous understandings of consciousness and healing. Studies of plant medicines like ayahuasca show measurable changes in brain function that correlate with the reported spiritual experiences. Research on traditional ecological knowledge demonstrates the sophistication of indigenous understanding of natural systems. Investigation of shamanic healing practices reveals mechanisms that complement modern medical approaches. The indigenous emphasis on ceremony and ritual reflects understanding that consciousness requires regular practices for maintaining connection with deeper spiritual realities. Rather than seeing spiritual development as individual achievement, these traditions emphasize community practices that support collective spiritual well-being. The mystery of consciousness. What makes us human? As we explore different perspectives on human origins, we inevitably encounter what philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. The mystery of how subjective experience arises from objective matter. This problem lies at the heart of understanding what makes humans unique and how our distinctive form of awareness might have emerged. Science can explain many aspects of brain function: how neurons fire, how information is processed, how memories are stored and retrieved. But it cannot yet explain why there is something it is like to be conscious, why we have inner subjective experiences rather than simply processing information like sophisticated computers. This explanatory gap between objective brain processes and subjective experience remains one of the deepest mysteries in science. Consider the simple experience of seeing the colour red. Neuroscience can map exactly which brain regions activate when we see red light, can trace the pathway from eye to visual cortex, can even predict with remarkable accuracy what we're seeing based on brain activity patterns. But none of this explains why there is a subjective experience of redness, that particular quality of consciousness that cannot be captured in any objective description. This mystery becomes even deeper when we consider that consciousness appears to have genuine causal power in the world. Our subjective experiences influence our decisions, which influence our actions, which shape the physical world. If consciousness were merely an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of brain activity with no real influence, how could our inner experiences have any effect on our behaviour? Yet clearly they do. The emergence of human consciousness represents one of the most dramatic phase transitions in the history of the universe. For billions of years after the Big Bang, matter organised itself into increasingly complex structures: stars, planets, simple chemical systems. Then somehow, some of these chemical systems began to experience themselves from the inside. The universe became aware of itself through conscious beings. This transition seems qualitatively different from other evolutionary developments. The emergence of life from non-life, remarkable as it is, involves continuous chemical processes that we can study and potentially understand. But the emergence of consciousness from non-consciousness appears to involve something categorically new: the appearance of subjectivity, interiority, experience itself. Different philosophical traditions have proposed various solutions to this mystery. Materialists argue that consciousness will eventually be explained in terms of brain function, that our sense of subjective experience represents an illusion created by complex information processing. Dualists propose that consciousness represents a non-physical aspect of reality that interacts with but cannot be reduced to brain activity. Panpsychists suggest that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality, present at some level in all matter and reaching complex organization in systems like human brains. This perspective sees consciousness not as emerging from complexity, but as a basic aspect of the universe that becomes more sophisticated through evolution. Integrated information theory, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, proposes that consciousness corresponds to integrated information, the amount of information generated by a system above and beyond its parts. This mathematical approach suggests that consciousness has quantifiable properties and may exist in varying degrees throughout nature. The mystery deepens when we consider that human consciousness appears to be capable of transcending ordinary limitations through practices like meditation, mystical experience, and various altered states. Advanced practitioners report experiences of expanded awareness, dissolution of subject-object boundaries, and direct perception of unity underlying apparent diversity. These experiences suggest that ordinary waking consciousness may represent just one possible configuration of awareness. Neuroscientific studies of meditation and mystical experiences show measurable changes in brain activity during these altered states, but the relationship between neural activity and reported conscious experiences remains mysterious. Do the brain changes cause the expanded awareness, or does expanded awareness cause the brain changes? The direction of causation remains unclear. The hard problem of consciousness is not merely an academic puzzle, but touches on fundamental questions about human nature, free will, and our place in the cosmos. If consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity, then our sense of being autonomous agents making free choices might be illusory. But if consciousness has genuine causal power, then humans may possess something that transcends purely physical processes. Levels of consciousness and human development. Human consciousness appears to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, from basic awareness of sensory input to sophisticated abstract reasoning to mystical experiences that transcend ordinary boundaries of self and world. Understanding these different levels of consciousness and how they develop may provide crucial insights into human origins and potential. At the most basic level, consciousness involves simple awareness, the capacity to distinguish between different sensory inputs and respond appropriately to environmental conditions. This level of consciousness exists throughout the animal kingdom and represents the foundation upon which more complex forms of awareness are built. Even simple organisms show evidence of basic awareness, suggesting that consciousness might be more fundamental to life than previously assumed. The next level involves self-awareness, the recognition that one exists as a distinct entity separate from the environment. This capacity emerges gradually in human development, typically becoming evident around 18 to 24 months, when children begin to recognize themselves in mirrors and use self-referential language. Self-awareness appears to be present in varying degrees in other species, particularly great apes, dolphins, and elephants. Metacognitive awareness represents another crucial level, consciousness of consciousness itself. Humans can not only think, but can think about thinking, can observe their own mental processes, and can deliberately modify their patterns of awareness. This capacity for introspection and self-reflection appears to be uniquely developed in humans and may be crucial for advanced learning, creativity, and spiritual development. Abstract conceptual thinking allows humans to manipulate symbols, create complex mental models of reality, and engage with ideas that have no direct correspondence to physical objects. Language development appears crucial for this level of consciousness, providing the symbolic tools necessary for abstract thought. The emergence of language in human evolution may have catalyzed the development of uniquely human forms of consciousness. Social consciousness involves awareness of other minds and the complex dynamics of group interaction. Humans possess sophisticated theory of mind capabilities, allowing us to model what others are thinking and feeling. This social awareness enables cooperation, culture transmission, and the complex organizational structures that characterize human civilization. Moral consciousness represents the capacity to evaluate actions and intentions according to ethical standards. Humans appear unique in their ability to act according to abstract moral principles that may conflict with immediate self-interest. This capacity for moral reasoning and ethical behavior may represent one of the most distinctive aspects of human consciousness. Creative consciousness involves the ability to generate novel ideas, artistic expressions, and innovative solutions to problems. Human creativity appears to emerge from the intersection of various mental processes: memory, imagination, pattern recognition, and conceptual thinking. The capacity for artistic and cultural creation distinguishes human consciousness from other forms of awareness we observe in nature. Transpersonal consciousness refers to experiences that transcend ordinary boundaries of individual identity. These states, reported across cultures through mystical traditions, involve feelings of connection with something larger than the individual self, whether conceived as God, cosmic consciousness, or universal awareness. Such experiences suggest that human consciousness may have potentials that extend beyond ordinary waking awareness. The development of consciousness appears to follow predictable patterns both in individual development and across cultures. Children progress through recognizable stages of cognitive and moral development, while human cultures show similar patterns of consciousness evolution from mythological to rational to potentially integral ways of understanding reality. Modern research in developmental psychology and contemplative neuroscience is beginning to map these different levels of consciousness and understand how they emerge through brain development and spiritual practice. Meditation research shows that contemplative practices can literally rewire the brain, strengthening neural networks associated with attention, compassion, and self-awareness. The implications of this multi-level understanding of consciousness for human origins are profound. Rather than consciousness being an all-or-nothing phenomenon, it appears to be a spectrum of capacities that can develop and evolve. Human consciousness may represent not a single breakthrough, but a series of evolutionary advances that built upon each other over hundreds of thousands of years. This developmental perspective suggests that human consciousness may still be evolving, that we may not yet have reached the full potential of what awareness can become. The diversity of consciousness states reported by mystics, the expanding capacities demonstrated through meditation research, and the ongoing development of human culture all suggest that consciousness evolution may be an ongoing process rather than a completed achievement. The observer and the observed. One of the most profound mysteries in understanding consciousness is the relationship between the observer and the observed, the subject who experiences and the objects of experience. This fundamental structure of consciousness shapes everything we know about reality, yet it remains deeply mysterious when examined closely. In ordinary awareness, we experience a clear distinction between ourselves as subjects and the world as object. There appears to be an observer inside our heads looking out at external reality, processing information, making decisions, and directing behavior. This subject-object structure seems so fundamental that we rarely question it, yet careful examination reveals deep puzzles about how this apparent division actually works. Who or what is the observer? When we introspect, looking for the self that seems to be at the center of experience, we find thoughts, sensations, emotions, and perceptions, but we never quite find the observer itself. The subject of experience seems to remain perpetually just out of reach of direct observation, like trying to use a flashlight to see darkness. This elusiveness of the observer has led some philosophical traditions to question whether there really is a substantial self at the center of experience. Buddhist analysis suggests that what we call self is actually a flowing stream of interconnected mental and physical processes with no fixed center or permanent observer. The sense of being a unified subject may be a construction created by the brain's integration of various information streams. Yet other traditions emphasize the reality and importance of the observer. Advaita Vedanta teaches that the true self, Atman, is the pure awareness that witnesses all changing experiences while remaining itself unchanged. This witness consciousness is considered to be the deepest reality of human existence, more fundamental than thoughts, emotions, or even the sense of individual identity. Modern neuroscience has identified various brain regions and networks associated with self-related processing, including the default mode network that becomes active during rest and introspection. But finding neural correlates of self-awareness doesn't necessarily solve the mystery of the observer. We still don't understand how objective brain processes give rise to the subjective sense of being a unified observer. The relationship between observer and observed becomes even more mysterious when we consider that consciousness seems capable of observing itself. We can watch our own thoughts arise and pass away, observe our emotional reactions, and even examine the process of observation itself. This reflexive capacity suggests that consciousness has a recursive structure that allows it to fold back on itself in potentially infinite loops. Meditation practices often involve developing greater clarity about the observer-observed relationship. Beginning meditators typically experience themselves as subjects trying to observe and control the objects of experience, thoughts, sensations, emotions. But with deeper practice, the boundary between observer and observed may begin to dissolve, leading to experiences of pure awareness without subject-object division. These non-dual states of consciousness challenge our ordinary understanding of the observer-observed relationship. In such states, awareness appears to exist without a center, without someone doing the observing. Experience continues, but there's no sense of a separate self having the experience. These states suggest that the subject-object structure of ordinary consciousness may be more flexible than we typically assume. The implications for understanding human origins are significant. If the observer-observed structure is not fixed but represents one possible configuration of consciousness, then human awareness may have evolved through different relationships between subject and object. Early human consciousness might have operated quite differently from modern awareness, perhaps with more fluid boundaries between self and environment. Quantum physics has added another layer to the observer-observed mystery by demonstrating that observation appears to play a fundamental role in physical reality. The act of measurement seems to influence what is measured, suggesting that consciousness may not be merely passive observation, but active participation in the creation of experienced reality. Alternative theories exploring the controversial frontiers. As we venture into the more speculative territory of human origins, we encounter theories that challenge conventional understanding from multiple directions. These ideas, while controversial, offer thought-provoking perspectives on humanity's emergence and have captured public imagination precisely because they address questions that mainstream science and traditional religion have difficulty answering completely. Ancient astronaut theories, gods from the stars. The possibility that extraterrestrial visitors influenced human development has fascinated people for decades, sparked by authors like Erich von Däniken and Zecharia Sitchin, who claim to find evidence of ancient alien contact in archaeological sites, ancient texts, and mythological traditions around the world. Zecharia Sitchin's translations of Sumerian cuneiform tablets proposed that beings called the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth, arrived on our planet hundreds of thousands of years ago from a distant planet called Nibiru. According to Sitchin's interpretation, these extraterrestrial beings genetically modified existing hominids to create modern humans as a slave species to mine gold for their civilization. Sitchin pointed to various Mesopotamian texts that describe the creation of humans by divine beings mixing clay with their own essence. He argued that these accounts preserve actual memories of genetic engineering rather than mythological metaphors. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, the Babylonian Enuma Elish, and other ancient texts describe gods creating humans for specific purposes, often involving labor and service to divine beings. The Nephilim mentioned in Genesis 6 have become central to ancient astronaut theories. These giants, or mighty men of old, were supposedly the offspring of sons of God and daughters of men. Ancient astronaut theorists interpret the sons of God as extraterrestrial visitors who interbred with early humans, creating a hybrid population with superior abilities. The Hebrew word Nephilim is sometimes translated as fallen ones, which could refer to beings who came down from the sky. Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods catalogued numerous archaeological anomalies and ancient artworks that he claimed depicted spacecraft, astronauts, and advanced technology. The Nazca lines in Peru, with their massive geometric patterns only visible from the air, were interpreted as ancient runways or landing sites. Cave paintings from around the world showing humanoid figures with helmet-like headgear were seen as depictions of astronauts. The precision stone cutting found at sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and the Great Pyramid of Giza presents genuine mysteries that conventional archaeology has difficulty explaining. These structures feature massive stone blocks cut with precision that rivals modern machining, fitted together without mortar so perfectly that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The logistics of quarrying, transporting, and precisely placing these multi-ton blocks challenges our understanding of ancient technological capabilities. Ancient astronaut theorists argue that such precision suggests the use of advanced technology beyond what conventional archaeology attributes to ancient civilizations. They point to the fact that many of these sites show evidence of different construction phases, with earlier phases often displaying superior craftsmanship than later additions, suggesting that advanced knowledge was lost over time. The cargo cult phenomenon provides a useful parallel for understanding how primitive societies might interpret contact with advanced technology. When modern aircraft began landing on Pacific Islands during World War II, some indigenous populations interpreted the planes and their crews as divine beings, bringing gifts from the gods. They created ritual runways and wooden replicas of aircraft in attempts to attract more visits from these seemingly supernatural visitors. If ancient humans encountered extraterrestrial visitors with advanced technology, similar interpretations might explain the prevalence of sky gods, flying vehicles, and divine interventions described in ancient texts worldwide. The Sanskrit Vedas describe vimanas, flying palaces, with detailed technical specifications. The Book of Ezekiel contains a famous vision of a flying vehicle with wheels within wheels and divine beings. Ancient Chinese texts describe flying dragons and celestial chariots. The genetic intervention hypothesis suggests that the relatively rapid emergence of modern human characteristics might be explained by extraterrestrial genetic manipulation rather than purely natural evolution. Proponents point to the apparent suddenness with which human brain size increased, language developed, and cultural sophistication emerged. They argue that the missing links in human evolution might be missing because human development involved artificial genetic modification rather than gradual natural selection. Some researchers have noted unusual features in human genetics that might support intervention theories. Humans have 46 chromosomes, while our closest primate relatives have 48, suggesting a chromosomal fusion event that could theoretically have been artificially induced. The human brain's rapid evolution and the emergence of complex language capabilities represent remarkable developments that occurred relatively quickly in evolutionary terms. The Watcher's tradition, found in the Book of Enoch and other ancient Jewish texts, describes angelic beings who descended to Earth and taught humanity various arts and sciences, including metallurgy, astronomy, and medicine. These beings also interbred with human women, producing giant offspring. The tradition suggests that this unauthorized intervention led to corruption and violence that necessitated the flood as divine punishment. Modern UFO sightings and alleged contact experiences often involve themes that parallel ancient accounts: beings from the sky who demonstrate advanced technology, conduct genetic experiments, and claim to have been involved in human development over long periods. While most of these modern accounts remain unverified, the consistency of certain themes across cultures and time periods is noteworthy. However, mainstream archaeology and anthropology offer alternative explanations for most evidence cited by ancient astronaut theorists. The precision stonework of ancient civilizations, while impressive, falls within the range of what could be accomplished through skilled craftsmanship, ingenious engineering techniques, and abundant labor over extended periods. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated methods by which ancient peoples could have achieved remarkable feats without advanced technology. The ancient texts, often cited as evidence of extraterrestrial contact, are subject to multiple interpretations. Mythological and religious language typically uses metaphorical and symbolic expression that shouldn't necessarily be interpreted literally. The gods and divine beings described in ancient texts may represent psychological archetypes, natural forces, or spiritual realities rather than physical extraterrestrial visitors. Nevertheless, the ancient astronaut hypothesis raises important questions about human origins and development that deserve consideration. The rapid pace of human cultural and technological evolution, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge of ancient civilizations, and the global prevalence of certain mythological themes suggest that human development may have been more complex than simple gradual evolution might suggest. Lost civilizations and advanced ancestors. The possibility that advanced human civilizations existed in prehistoric times, only to be destroyed by catastrophic events, offers another alternative perspective on human origins and development. This theory suggests that humanity may have achieved sophisticated technological and spiritual development multiple times throughout history, with each cycle ending in collapse and necessitating the rebuilding of civilization from scratch. Plato's account of Atlantis, written around 360 BCE, describes a powerful maritime civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, possessing advanced technology and governing a vast empire before being destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods. While most scholars consider Atlantis to be Plato's philosophical allegory rather than historical account, some researchers have proposed that it might preserve memories of actual prehistoric civilizations. The Younger Dryas period, approximately 12,800 to 11,500 years ago, represents a time of dramatic climate change when global temperatures dropped rapidly, ice sheets advanced, and many large mammal species went extinct. Recent research has suggested that this climate catastrophe might have been triggered by a cosmic impact, either an asteroid or comet collision that caused widespread destruction and global cooling. This Younger Dryas impact hypothesis could explain the sudden disappearance of advanced Ice Age civilizations and the apparent cultural discontinuity between sophisticated Paleolithic cave art and the gradual development of Neolithic farming communities. If advanced hunter-gatherer societies existed during the Ice Age, their traces might have been obliterated by the catastrophic events that ended the Pleistocene epoch. The precision and artistry of Göbekli Tepe indicates that the hunter-gatherer societies that built it possessed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and symbolic representation. The fact that this site was deliberately buried around 8,000 years ago adds another layer of mystery, suggesting that its builders consciously chose to conceal their achievement for unknown reasons. Advanced ancient technology claims point to various artifacts and techniques that seem to exceed the technological capabilities conventionally attributed to ancient civilizations. The Antikythera mechanism, a complex bronze device dating to ancient Greece, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mechanical engineering that wasn't matched again until the development of clockwork mechanisms over a millennium later. Evidence of precision machining has been claimed at various ancient sites. The granite boxes in the pyramids of Egypt show tool marks suggesting machine-like precision in their construction. Some researchers argue that the tolerances achieved in these artifacts exceed what could be accomplished with the copper and bronze tools conventionally attributed to ancient Egyptian craftsmen. Ancient maps like the Piri Reis map of 1513 appear to show accurate representations of coastlines and geographical features that shouldn't have been known to medieval cartographers. The map apparently shows the Antarctic coastline as it would appear without ice cover, suggesting access to geographical knowledge that predates the official discovery of Antarctica by centuries. Global flood traditions provide another line of evidence for catastrophic destruction of early civilizations. Over 200 cultures worldwide preserve stories of great floods that destroyed earlier ages of humanity. While some of these stories may derive from shared sources or common experiences of regional flooding, the global prevalence and consistency of flood myths suggests they might preserve cultural memories of actual catastrophic events. The cyclical civilization theory proposes that human societies have repeatedly achieved high levels of development only to be destroyed by natural catastrophes, forcing survivors to rebuild from primitive conditions. This model suggests that rather than steady progress from primitive to advanced conditions, human history might involve recurring cycles of advancement and collapse. Archaeological evidence for this cyclical model includes the sophisticated astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient monuments like Stonehenge, the mathematical and engineering precision of structures like the Great Pyramid, and the advanced metallurgical techniques demonstrated in artifacts like the Damascus steel swords that modern science has only recently learned to replicate. Underwater archaeology continues to reveal submerged structures that suggest complex human settlements existed when sea levels were lower during the last ice age. The structures off the coast of India, near Dwarka, show evidence of planned urban development with sophisticated drainage systems. Similar underwater ruins near Malta, Cuba, and other locations suggest that significant human settlements existed in areas now covered by hundreds of feet of ocean. Genetic bottlenecks in human population history support the possibility of catastrophic events that nearly destroyed human civilization. The genetic evidence for severe population reductions around 70,000 years ago and again around 12,000 years ago coincides with geological evidence for major catastrophic events that could have destroyed advanced civilizations. Nevertheless, the lost civilization hypothesis raises important questions about the assumptions underlying conventional archaeological and historical understanding. Consciousness and reality creation, the ultimate frontier. Perhaps the most radical alternative theory about human origins suggests that consciousness itself is the fundamental creative force in the universe, and that what we call physical reality represents one level of manifestation within a much larger consciousness-based cosmos. This perspective draws from quantum physics, consciousness research, mystical traditions, and speculative theories about the nature of reality itself. The simulation hypothesis, popularized by philosophers like Nick Bostrom, proposes that our experienced reality might be a sophisticated computer simulation run by more advanced beings. This idea draws support from the rapid development of virtual reality technology and the observation that simulated realities are becoming increasingly indistinguishable from real experience. If technological civilizations routinely create simulated worlds populated by conscious beings, then statistically we might be more likely to be simulated than original beings. Ancient creation myths often describe reality emerging from thought, word, or consciousness, rather than from physical processes. The biblical "let there be light," the Hindu concept of reality as the dream of Brahma, and the Gnostic teaching that the material world represents a kind of divine imagination, all suggest that consciousness precedes and creates what we experience as physical reality. Modern physics has discovered that consciousness appears to play a fundamental role in quantum mechanics through the measurement problem. Quantum systems exist in superposition states until observed, at which point they collapse into definite values. This observer effect suggests that consciousness might be intimately involved in the creation of experienced reality rather than simply observing pre-existing physical facts. The holographic principle in cosmology proposes that all the information contained in a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary, suggesting that three-dimensional reality might emerge from information patterns existing in lower dimensional space. This principle resonates with mystical teachings that describe experienced reality as a projection from higher dimensional consciousness. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that every possible outcome of quantum events creates a separate parallel universe. This multiplicity of realities implies that consciousness might be constantly navigating between different possible worlds, with individual awareness representing one path through an infinite maze of potential realities. The concept of collective consciousness, explored by thinkers like Carl Jung and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, proposes that individual minds participate in larger consciousness fields that transcend personal boundaries. Jung's collective unconscious contains archetypal patterns shared by all humanity, while Teilhard's noosphere represents the global layer of human thought and culture that influences individual consciousness development. Manifestation practices found in various spiritual traditions suggest that consciousness has direct reality-creating power. From prayer and visualization to more systematic approaches like ceremonial magic, humans have long believed that focused intention can influence physical circumstances. While controversial from scientific perspectives, some research suggests that consciousness might indeed have measurable effects on physical systems. Near-death experiences often involve reports of encountering fundamental creative consciousness that appears to be the source of experienced reality. People who have had such experiences frequently describe reality as being much more fluid and consciousness-dependent than ordinary awareness suggests. They report realms where thought instantly creates experience and where individual consciousness merges with universal awareness. The implications of consciousness-based reality creation for human origins are profound. If consciousness is fundamental and reality emerges through awareness rather than the reverse, then human development might represent the universe awakening to itself through evolving beings. Our origins would then be inseparable from the cosmic evolution of consciousness itself. Weaving the threads together, multiple truths, one mystery. As we near the end of our journey, through different perspectives on human origins, we find ourselves not with a single definitive answer, but with a rich tapestry of possibilities that each illuminate different aspects of the profound mystery of human existence. Rather than seeing these various approaches as competing explanations that must exclude each other, we might consider them as complementary lenses that together provide a more complete understanding than any single perspective could offer alone. The scientific account of human evolution from African origins reveals the biological substrate of our development, the gradual emergence of larger brains, sophisticated tool use, language capabilities, and complex social organization over hundreds of thousands of years. This evolutionary perspective grounds us in our continuity with the natural world while explaining the remarkable adaptability that allowed humans to spread across the planet and develop diverse cultures. The mystical and spiritual traditions offer insights into the experiential dimensions of consciousness that pure materialism struggles to address. Whether through Gnostic teachings about divine sparks trapped in matter, Eastern perspectives on consciousness evolution through multiple lifetimes, or indigenous wisdom about the interconnectedness of all life. These traditions point toward aspects of human nature that transcend biological description. The alternative theories, from ancient astronauts to lost civilizations to consciousness-based reality creation, challenge us to question assumptions about the limits of human potential and the nature of reality itself. While these speculative approaches may lack conclusive evidence, they serve the valuable function of keeping our minds open to possibilities that conventional paradigms might overlook. The careful analysis of Genesis and other ancient texts reveals sophisticated metaphorical and symbolic wisdom that may preserve insights about consciousness development, moral awakening, and spiritual evolution that remain relevant regardless of their historical accuracy. These stories may represent humanity's attempt to understand profound truths about existence through narrative frameworks that transcend literal, factual reporting. Perhaps the deepest truth emerging from this exploration is that human consciousness itself represents something unprecedented in the known universe, matter becoming aware of itself biology developing the capacity for meaning-making, and individual organisms awakening to their connection with cosmic processes. Whether this occurred through gradual evolution, divine intervention, extraterrestrial influence, or some combination of factors, the emergence of human awareness remains genuinely miraculous. The various perspectives we've explored need not be mutually exclusive. Evolution and spiritual development might represent different aspects of the same cosmic process. Scientific materialism and mystical insight might address different levels of reality without contradicting each other. Ancient wisdom and modern knowledge might both contribute essential pieces to a puzzle too large and complex for any single approach to solve completely. What unites all these perspectives is recognition that human existence involves profound mystery. Because if there's one lesson hidden in the Genesis myth, in the bones beneath our feet, in the stardust within our veins, it's that mystery is not a problem to solve, but a gift to embrace. Maybe the Garden of Eden was never a place, but a state of being, a time when we lived in direct communion with the mystery, not needing to name it, dissect it, or control it. And perhaps we can return there, not by rejecting knowledge, but by letting it lead us back to awe. The journey's end. We've travelled far tonight, from the Hebrew words of Genesis to the genetic evidence in our DNA, from ancient Gnostic texts to modern theories about consciousness itself. What have we discovered? Perhaps that the question, where do we come from, has many beautiful answers, each revealing a different facet of the mystery that is human existence. Whether we emerge through evolution, divine creation, ancient intervention, or something we haven't even imagined yet, one thing remains clear. We are part of something magnificent and ongoing. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you might find yourself wondering which of these perspectives resonates most deeply with you. Maybe it's the scientific elegance of our African origins, the mystical wisdom of ancient traditions, or the mind-bending possibilities of consciousness creating reality itself. The search for our origins isn't really about finding a final answer. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and staying amazed by the mystery of existence itself. So tonight, let yourself live in wonder. Not despite the contradictions, but because of them. Because in the space between certainty and surrender, something eternal sings. And if you enjoyed taking on this journey with me, remember to like this video and subscribe for more explorations into the unsolved mysteries that shape our world. Sweet dreams, fellow guardians of human wisdom.